Here to discuss the resignation of President Richard Nixon, two great political commentators. We welcome back the gentleman who has a best-selling book, The Greatest Comeback, How Richard Nixon Rose from Defeat to Create the New Majority. That would be one Patrick J. Buchanan. He is phoning in. And from Newsmax, New York, Roger Stone, author of a new book. I guess it's coming out Monday. It's entitled Nixon's Secrets. And we also point out that in this day and age, Roger Stone is a columnist, I guess, on his website, The Stone Zone. Roger, that's almost poetic. It's good to have you checking in this morning from Newsmax, New York. Thanks so much for making time for us.
Great to be here.
Pat, let's start with you. Can you describe your reaction when the president went on television and made the official announcement that he would resign effective at noon on August 9th?
Yeah, JD, it was no surprise to me. I was at Camp David on the Sunday before when we basically got a hold of the June 23rd tape and matched it against what the president said. And we decided on sort of a strategy, basically to put the tape out publicly on Monday, which we knew would cause a firestorm on Tuesday morning when it hit, and that the president would be forced to resign by Friday. So it was no surprise to me. As a matter of fact, by Tuesday, even before Goldwater came over and Hugh Scott and Johnny Rhodes of Arizona, Ray Price was already working on the resignation speech. So it was no surprise. It was the end of basically 18 months since March of '73 that we had been going through this process.
In retrospect, as we look at this, Roger, do you think Richard Nixon made the right decision to step aside, or should he have continued the fight?
Yes, I think he did make the right decision to decide. Look, I think he should have burned the tapes to begin with. I think he should have fired those who perpetrated the Watergate break-in. I actually think John Dean is a much bigger player in that early enterprise than he admits in his latest book. But because he did not do those things, and because I think he was indecisive due to loyalty to a number of his top aides, he was taken down. But I think the president himself recognized he no longer had the political support to govern. I was in the room that day when he resigned. I was in tears. I was much more junior than Pat. I was 19. But it was a very sad day. On the other thing, I think he did the best thing for the country.
Well, Roger, you mentioned John Dean, and we'll get to that in just a minute, but we want to take a look back. There's a new video series that's been released by the Richard Nixon Foundation, and it's one in which President Nixon tells the story of his final days in the White House from his own perspective. Let's take a listen to President Nixon now recalling the so-called smoking gun tape, and we'll get you gentlemen to react to it after we hear what the late president had to say.
I had the 23rd tape transcript brought over because I thought that it was important that they see just what the problems were, because that was causing concern. Let me say, had there not been the 23rd tape transcript, we would have still had to resign, due to the fact that before that transcript ever was made public, as we know, the three Democrats have been lost on the committee. But nevertheless, this was the final blow, the final nail in the coffin.
Well, what about that, Pat? You talked about being at Camp David, the intellectual and the logistical exercise that led to the resignation. To listen to Mr. Nixon discuss this in retrospect with such equipoise and even a smile on his face, does that surprise you at all?
I think those tapes that you're describing there were made, many years after his resignation. But I basically agree with Roger's analysis of this. That look, when we saw the tape, it was, and we saw the contradiction. We knew that it would drop the base out of Nixon's support, and he had already been voted impeachment in the House Judiciary Committee. We knew that he could not survive in the House. People had argued, and I backgrounded the press, that we might just go straight to the Senate for the trial. And so we knew the inevitable. Even before that hit, we thought there was a real chance he was going to be impeached and convicted. After it hit, his basic support, I understand, in the Senate fell flat to 20. So we knew he was going out over this. And I do agree with Roger. Let me say this. Look, if Nixon, and it was not his way, it was an act of loyalty, it was an act of those are our guys. They did this foolish break-in there, and it went right up to the middle or even higher at the committee to reelect. If Nixon had just cursed and said, "It is too bad, we're going to try to help those guys get some lawyers, but they got to go," and the higher-ups who let it be happen got to be fired, and we got to move on, I think that would have ended it. But instead, he got caught up, J.D., in the, within hours, people from the committee to reelect who knew about it were running to people in the White House, contaminating the whole building in an obstruction of justice.
And Roger, as we look at that, and this, we're going to get to the John Dean thing in just a second, but Dean in his book footnotes that you had guys who were lawyers, but they were used to being corporate lawyers, not criminal defense attorneys, and that may have jump-started the whole process that Pat just talked about.
Look, Dean's book is a fraud. He says it is designed to tell us what the president knew and when he knew it, but he omits his own tape conversations with President Nixon on March 13th, 17th, 20th, and 21st. Every one of those conversations is about the cover-up. And what they show is that Dean lied to President Nixon for 9 months. It isn't until the 13th of March that we learn, that the president learns that the Watergate break-in is connected to the White House because Gordon Strachan, an aide to Bob Haldeman, the chief of staff, has allegedly been getting transcripts of the Watergate bugs. So really, the truth is, John Dean has airbrushed himself out of the narrative and tried to deflect blame onto the president. It's a complete act of dishonesty. I got a galley of John Dean's book prior to publication. I deconstruct his book in my book piece by piece. If you want the truth, if you want the refutation, I demonstrate in my book that John Dean is the Watergate weasel.
And that book, I believe, will be released on Monday, so it's a good timing to have you on here today, Roger Stone. This dispute with Dean, we should also point out that Mr. Dean will be invited on the program to give his point of view on history. But Pat, you were there, as Roger notes, much senior both in terms of age and in status in the White House in 1974. Your take on this entire episode, the personalities, do you share the same, well, lack of a better term, contempt for John Dean that Roger displays here?
Well, Dean was a contemporary of mine, and he was a friend of mine, to be honest, before he left. And my view about Dean, and I certainly have not done any of the research that Roger did on, or the exegesis on those tapes, but my view of Dean was that he saw himself as part of a group that engaged in the cover-up of the Watergate offenses and tried to carve it out and tried to contain it. And he saw himself being thrown over the side. And he logically said, look, I'm not going to take the fall for this. And he went to his buddy who was the lawyer, and they went to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Incidentally, J.D., I made a secret flight to Florida at the president's request on Easter Day that year. I'm not sure what's the exact date, with Chappie Rose, H. Chapman Rose, a senior lawyer, and Ron Ziegler, down to see the old man in Key Biscayne, and we spent 10 hours analyzing what we knew and what I recommended. And at that point, I recommended to Nixon that he had to accept the resignations of Haldeman, Ehrlichman, and Dean, because I could not sort out who was telling the truth when Dean had gone to the prosecutors, etc. And so, but Nixon came back and he didn't do it. This was one of the flaws of Nixon was, and I'm going to pick up on Roger's word, was indecisiveness, surprising indecisiveness here, indecisiveness in not looking at those tapes and saying, I recommended right on paper, get rid of all the tapes except your foreign policy tapes and the 7 conversations that Dean's testified about. Get rid of them and burn them all and say, in effect, if you don't like it, impeach and be damned. And then move on, and I think he would have survived. But that's what surprised me about the old man was that the fact that it was like you have to do a certain surgery to survive, and the longer you put it off, the deeper they're going to have to go. And so that's what my feeling about it. But basically, I hear all this talk about what a terrible man Nixon was. Nixon had his flaws, but he was fundamentally a good man in my judgment. He was certainly good to me. I mean, for 7 or 8 years, I never had a better boss.
And unfortunately, we will have to end it there. To Pat Buchanan, the author of Comeback, and to Roger Stone, the author of Nixon's Secrets. Thanks for giving us, sharing not so much some secrets, but the inside stories of what transpired 40 years ago this week. America's Forum continues following this.